Good evening.
This is Nityanand Singh of Patanjali Rishikul, wishing you all a good day, because some of us are sitting in India where the sun has set, and some in other parts of the world where the sun is indicating different hours of the day. Namaskar to all of you. Patanjali Group of Schools, founded by Shri Lokmanilal ji, is dedicated to actualizing his vision of education, of nurturing intelligence, sensitivity, and compassion in students. The Patanjali educational family is proud and happy that Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, the grandson of the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, and also of the most revered Shri C. Rajgopalachari, has agreed to deliver the very first of the many lectures that we hope will be delivered in years to come. Professor Rajmohan Gandhi is a distinguished historian, biographer, thinker, and conscience keeper for humanity, who even in the perilous times of emergency wrote fearlessly in defense of right thought and action. The topic he has chosen for his talk is For the Future, Learning from the Past. We eagerly look forward to hear what Rajmohan ji, with his keen sense of history and his far-sightedness, will say. We begin the program with the invocation. Professor Krishna Gupta, daughter-in-law and able lieutenant of Shri Lokmanilal ji, presently the Honorary Secretary of the Patanjali Group of Schools, has played a significant role in leading the Patanjali Group of Schools to great heights in imparting value-oriented education. Madam, I request you to formally welcome the speaker of the day and other participants in today's events.
With the divine grace and the blessings of the founder, we have gathered together on this virtual platform, and we are able to connect with the teachers and with Rajmohan ji from USA. I'm happy to announce that our educational society, MPVM Samiti, has decided to launch the Lokmanilal Memorial Lecture Series. And the first one is being delivered today by Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, an eminent historian, a great scholar, a creative writer, and a renowned journalist. And of course, the inheritor of the proud legacy of his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, our source of inspiration. Rajmohan ji has been actively engaged in upholding democratic rights, human rights, in trust building, and in his crusade against inequalities and corruption. I'm very confident that his lecture today would be very thought-provoking and illuminating. I welcome you, Rajmohan ji. I extend a very warm welcome to all the faculty members from Allahabad University who've joined us. Professor Manas Mukul Das is with us. He was head Department of English, again, a great scholar and a creative thinker, a very spiritual person. And Professor R.C. Tripathi ji, I suppose he has also joined us, or he may be joining us. He was the head and professor, Department of Psychology, a great social scientist. Presently, he's the Kulguru of Swaraj Vidyapith, and a unique university which is actually disseminating, knowledge about Swaraj, which was so close to the heart of Mahatma Gandhi. I also welcome Professor Vinay Pandey, Professor Ranjana Kakkarji, faculty members from history, and Rajesh Purohit, former director, Indian Museum, and also former director, Allahabad Museum. And I also welcome the members of our MPVM Samiti. I can see Om Prakash ji. He's the vice president of the Samiti and president of MPVM school governing body. And I welcome all the teachers from Patanjali group of schools and all our friends and educators and principals who have joined us from across the country and across the world. I welcome also the friends from the media. Lokmanilal ji, our founder, was a man of vision and action. He was an engineer with a scientific temper and a spiritual mindset. And he believed, he was very keen to make India strong and self-reliant. He himself has written that I took the vow that I must make this country economically independent. And when he was studying in BHU, he was doing his engineering. He found that, the large quantities of potato crop, which is our staple crop, was rotting because of lack of storage facility. And large quantity of potatoes were being imported from outside, and thus causing a heavy drain on the national exchequer. Therefore, he just plunged into research and exploration how to preserve the potato crop, and he built the first cold storage in Meerut in 1938, which was followed by chain of cold storages in the in northern regions of India, and thus became the pioneer of cold storage industry in India. He was very inspired by Mahamana Madan Mohan Malviya ji, and like Malviya ji, he also felt very strongly that the only way to regenerate India was through temples of learning. Lighthouses of learning which were rooted in Indian cultural value content and which were dedicated to character building and the teaching of science and spirituality. And that was the reason he established Maharshi Patanjali Vidya Mandir in the year 1986. And he named the school, he chose to name the school after the great seer of ancient India, Maharshi Patanjali, the great exponent of the science of yoga and a philosophy of disciplining the mind, body, and spirit, and thus paving the way for the growth of holistic personality. In fact, development of integrated personality is the very purpose of education. And he also felt, he strongly believed and felt, and he was convinced that this school should become the nucleus for the for the establishment of similar lighthouses of learning. We should not stop at one school. India needed more temples of learning, and as a result, we were able to realize his dream, because sister schools came up gradually: Patanjali Nursery School, Ganga Gurukulam, and Patanjali Rishikul. Now, all the schools are, in fact, they are institutions which are really getting a lot of credibility because of quality education, and especially, value-oriented education. Now, the Patanjali group of schools are all dedicated to carry forward the legacy of the founder, his dream that of strong, enlightened India through education is our mission. And I'm also very happy to recall Rajmohan ji's visit to Allahabad way back in 1988. And he was, of course, accompanied by his dear friend, Om Prakash Pagadia ji, who is again our vice president of the Samiti and who is on the panel also. And Lokmanilal ji was so happy to take Rajmohan ji to visit the newly established Maharshi Patanjali Vidya Mandir. Maharshi Patanjali Vidya Mandir, as you know, was established in 1986, and Rajmohan ji visited the school in 1988. And coincidentally, the children were celebrating the Gandhi Jayanti. And they were so excited and delighted when they found that Rajmohan ji was visiting the school and was addressing them. And of course, this bond grew deeper, and Lokmanilal ji decided to back Rajmohan ji in his maiden attempt at contesting the parliamentary general elections against Rajiv Gandhi in 1989 in Amethi. That was a historical, I would say, historical election. It was a fight against corruption. Again, it may not yield victory in the elections, but he won the victory in the hearts of the people. So, and we were very happy, in fact, to work for him during the elections. I'm sure, the lecture today, and who can be a better person than to start, deliver the first Lokmanilal Memorial Lecture. And I'm very confident and very sure that this lecture will leave us all very, very inspired. And I'm sure a very vibrant interaction will follow the lecture. Thank you so much. और हम एक बार फिर से आप सबका बहुत बहुत स्वागत करती हूँ मैं.
Thank you, madam. Now I request Mr. Shushmita Kanungo, Principal Maharshi Patanjali Vidya Mandir, to present a profile of today's distinguished speaker.
Namaskar. Professor Rajmohan Gandhi needs no introduction. Grandson of illustrious grandfathers, father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, and first Indian Governor General, Chakravarti Rajgopalachari, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi is himself a famous personality, occupying a central figure among the Indian thinkers as a writer and speaker with humanitarian goals. Journeying between continents, Asia and America, and dividing his time and work between India and the United States, he has embraced multifarious roles as a historian, journalist, biographer, and an educationist. Professor Gandhi is currently serving as research professor in the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he has been teaching since 1997. In India, he had served as a member of Rajya Sabha from 1990 to 1992 and had also been the editor of Indian Express at Chennai. Since 1956, he has been associated with the work of Initiatives of Change, formerly known as the Moral Rearmament. He has authored a number of books like A Tale of Two Revolts, India 1857 and the American Civil War in 2009, Ghaffar Khan, Non-Violent Badshah of the Pakhtuns in 2004, Patel, A Life in 1990, and Understanding the Muslim Mind in 1986. He is a prolific writer and his recent books include Punjab 1707 to 1947, A History from Aurangzeb to Mountbatten in 2013, Understanding India's Founding Fathers in 2016, Why Gandhi Still Matters, an appraisal of Mahatma's legacy in 2017, and Modern South India, a history from the 17th century to our times in 2018. In the year 2002, he was given the Sahitya Academy Award for his book Rajaji, A Life, a Biography of Chakravarti Rajgopalachari. In 2007, Professor Gandhi was the recipient of Indian History Congress Biennial Award for his biography of his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, Gandhi, the man, his people, and the empire. A great thinker and an ardent advocate of democratic rights, Professor Gandhi's initiative of a new website, Himmat, a space for what must be said, is a venture in truthful journalism. Today, Professor Gandhi ranks as one of the foremost democratic thinkers and as a critical sentinel for India's founding values. He is an upholder of humanitarian values of justice and a way away from anger and resentment in search for common humanity that can reconcile differences. So I welcome you, sir, on behalf of Maharishi Patanjali Group of Schools. Thank you.
And now I request Shri Rajmohan Gandhi to deliver the much-awaited Lokmani Memorial Lecture of the year 2021. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm greatly touched by everything that has been said. लेकिन जो कुछ इतना कह दिया है तो मुझे आप लोगों ने काफी नर्वस करा दिया है. Let me say that it is a very great privilege for me to be asked to give this first Shri Lokmanilal Ji Memorial Lecture. This is an exceptional honor to me. As Krishna Ji has mentioned, I was here at your institution in 1988, and I was the recipient of amazing warmth and hospitality, generosity, friendship from Shri Lokmanilal Ji and his family. And it means a great deal to me to be at this occasion. And I'm obliged to everyone who has joined this evening. And I'm grateful for all the remarks made by, I won't mention them all, but I thank them all. But now, allow me to recall that I was in Allahabad even before my 1988 visit. I came at the age of 12 and a half when Gandhiji had been killed, and along with my father and my uncle, Shri Ramdas Gandhi, and many others, family as well as so many others, we brought Gandhiji's asthi for immersion at Triveni. So that was my first visit in 1948. And there was an absolutely immense concourse of humanity on all banks of the rivers at that time, as I remember. I next came, or not next, but I made another visit when I brought my father's asthi for immersion at Triveni in 1957. So those are very sacred memories. Like so many people all over India and others too, the connection with Prayag, with Allahabad is indescribably precious and sacred. I must also mention that Allahabad mentions is mentioned in one or two of my books. The book Two Revolts, where 1857 in India was described as also at the same time this amazing happening on the other side of the world, the Civil War, the revolt by the southern states, which Lincoln had to suppress. And so in that 1857 story, there are references to Allahabad, and historians will not be surprised about that. Now, my history books, there is the Two Revolts that has been mentioned, the history of Punjab, the history of South India. But I also want to mention, because I'm going to read one or two bits from it, this book called Revenge and Reconciliation. And this is kind of an overview, of course, from a particular standpoint of history, of India's history from the Mahabharata to our times. This was published in 1999. And I'll mention this before I read from some of my research and books, that this experience of writing these joint histories of several areas. For instance, when I wrote about Punjab, it was not just Indian Punjab. I wrote of the story of undivided Punjab from the time of Aurangzeb to the tragic time of partition. And so various regions and various communities, various parts of the subcontinent were covered in that. Similarly, when I wrote my South Indian history relatively recently, so many great cultures and regions, linguistic regions, cultural regions of southern India, vast area, the peninsular India, which is so many ways different from northern India. And as you know, the north and central India has been greatly, powerfully influenced by the Himalayas, by the waters that come streaming down through the great rivers. But the southern part of India is influenced by the oceans. And it has had this amazing connection through trade for centuries, both from the east of South India and the west of South India. So South India has been influenced physically and geographically in terms of trade also by somewhat different set of factors compared with northern India. Through this, my Punjab attempt and my South India attempt, I've learned the advantage of what might be called joint histories of larger regions. But I'm also aware, as the other history teachers here, history professors who very kindly joined this evening, they're aware that so many local histories are also tremendously important. Krishnaji has mentioned this amazing history of your institution. And now the history of the Patanjali group of schools would be an incredible history. Lokmanilalji's life would be an amazing history. A school has a history, a sadak, a street has a history, a tree has a history. Of course, a city has a history. So I'm very glad that I am encouraging the interest in history as a result of this opening lecture in this remarkable series, which I hope will continue for a very long time. Now, for the future, learning from the past is the broad title for my lecture. And I'm going to emphasize some forgotten aspects of history. History is so vast, so many areas, so many periods, so many ways in which we can read history or remind ourselves of it. But my focus this evening will be on some forgotten aspects of history, especially of of our country. And I'm going to start with, the Mahabharata. Many people know, I think all those who have read the Mahabharata from time to time, know that a very powerful feature in Mahabharata is revenge. So many people remember something that happened and then they take revenge. In fact, a Marathi version of the Mahabharata several decades ago, the title, the Shirshak, was Revenge. Revenge was the main theme, or is the main theme of the Mahabharata. Now, but it is also good to know that Mahabharata has some very powerful scenes also of forgiveness. And so I'm going to read just briefly from that. So the epic's most memorable reconciliation scene takes place one morning after the war, when Vyasa, the author, takes Kurukshetra's survivors, Draupadi, the Pandav brothers, their mother Kunti, and the parents of the Kauravas, of course all the Kauravas are killed, all grieving for the dead heroes, to the banks of the river Bhagirathi. And Vyasa tells them, I shall dispel your grief. At night, I will give you a vision of the dead heroes. The survivors' sorrows was such that the hours until sundown felt like a whole year. Then, after a roar heard in the waters, the dead emerged, led by Bhishma and Drona, Drupada and Draupadi's sons Abhimanyu, Karna and Duryodhana. Gandhari's other sons all returned. As P. Lal writes, cleansed of hate and jealousy, son met father and mother, wife met husband, friend greeted friend, the Pandavas met Karna and embraced him, a scene of reconciliation. No grief, no fear, no suspicion, no reproach. Nothing but the meeting of. So it is a very powerful scene, perhaps a glimpse in a vision of what God desires for all warring groups. In the Mahabharata, revenge is a fact, reconciliation is a dream. Forgiveness is preached, vengeance is practiced. Healing is conceived, injury is executed. But I think it's important for us to remember this incredible scene from the Mahabharata of forgiveness and reconciliation. Now, I also, of course, want to refer to this that almost everybody here would know. These amazing lines from Tulsidasa's Ramayana, the Ravan Rathi Virath Raghuvira. Now, we all know of that moment. Vibhishan is troubled at the contrast between Ram and Ravan. Ravan is in his strong rath, and Ram is barefooted. He's on the earth. He has no chariot. How will you defeat Ravan? Vibhishan asks. And he was very worried and he was alarmed. Of course, he loved Ram, Lord Ram. And Vibhishan despondently said to Ram, oh Lord, you have neither a chariot, nor a shield or armor for your body, or anything to put on your feet. How would you attain victory over this formidable enemy? And then these incredible lines. Lord Ram, who is an embodiment of mercy, compassion, and grace, comforted Vibhishan with this reply. Listen, friend, the chariot that leads to victory is of another kind. Valor and fortitude are its wheels. Truthfulness and virtuous conduct are its banners. Its four horses are strength, discretion, self-restraint, and benevolence. It is harnessed with three cords: forgiveness, compassion, equanimity. Whoever has this righteous chariot has no enemy to conquer anywhere. These are incredible lines from the Tulsi Ramayana. Next, I'm going to recall another scene with another lesson, you might say. And we all know about the story of Prithviraj, the great story of Prithviraj. And but some aspects of the story are also worth recalling, which may not always be remembered. Now, the poet who wrote Prithviraj Vijay recalls that when the ambassador of Muhammad Ghori arrived at the court of Prithviraj, and then the poet describes the ambassador who has come to meet Prithviraj in these words: the color of his beard, the color of his eyebrows, his very lashes were so yellow, they were yellower than the grapes that grow in his native region. His speech was horrible, the way he spoke. His speech was like the cry of wild birds. All his pronunciation was impure. His complexion was impure. He had what looked like skin disease. So ghastly white was his skin. Now, another writer from those times, Somadev, but he mentions that this Turk, this ambassador who's come to meet Prithviraj, he has learned the speech of the Indian. Yes, his pronunciation may be impure, but he has learned the language of the people that he has come to conquer. And so this also is worth noting from the past, that other people learned the languages of India for their own advantage. And the people of India were too slow to learn the languages, the situation, the circumstances, the histories of the people who wanted to conquer us. Now, one or two bits that I learned while I was writing my South Indian history. I think many in Allahabad and northern India have heard, of course, Bengal, of how the British came and conquered first Bengal, and then from there began their rule all over India. But it's also important to note that South India played a very great role in the British conquest of India in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. And Robert Clive is a name that everybody knows who studied history. Robert Clive played this role in Calcutta and also before that in South India. And Robert Clive had a close friend called Robert Orme, O-R-M-E. He was a friend of Clive and he became a military historian. And he's written histories of Clive's conquests. So this is what he writes: that traders came to India for wealth and mariners for jobs because of, quote, the magnificence of the richest empire of the globe, unquote. So Robert Orme, writing in the 1760s, says that India in the 17th and 18th century was the richest empire of the globe. And people came from all over the world for jobs, for opportunities in India. Just as in recent decades, people go to the United States or Canada or elsewhere, Australia, other parts of the world. India and China at that time were the go-to countries for those with great ambitions, spirit of adventure. And so it's also worth noting, so 17th and 18th century, India was so rich. And for some centuries before that, the Mughals had ruled India. So now the Mughal Empire had many pluses and minuses. And we must, if you want to make a judgment or assessment of it, we must note all the pluses, we must note all the minuses. But it is worth noting that because of the stability that the Mughal Empire gave, India did become the richest nation on the globe. It's worth noting that. And after the Mughals declined, for some time, Europeans continued to seek employment in India. So when Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan were ruling Mysore, their rule also had so many negatives, of course, but they also brought stability. And so their rule also, so many people, pictures of Europeans working in various parts of Srirangapatna, elsewhere in Karnataka, Mysore, show this large number of Europeans coming to those places for employment. And later, when Ranjit Singh was ruling Punjab, similarly, Frenchmen, Italians came and found employment in India. So this also is worth I thought, recalling. Now a different kind of scene. I mentioned 1857 earlier, and Allahabad played a very important role. Allahabad was very crucial for British success in suppressing the revolt. But there is a scene I want to recall, which took place in Punjab. So as many know, historians all know, that Punjab did not play an active role in the 1857 revolt. And the British were able to you might say, enlist Punjab on their side. And there was a man called Nicholson, young man, who was enlisted by the British. And he brought a column of soldiers, British and also Indian soldiers, from Punjab to Delhi to crush the rebellion in Delhi. So he created a column, and he marched with that column from near Rawalpindi and then all the way to Delhi. So this is a story of what happened when he brought his column to Jalandhar. On 28 June 1857, Nicholson was a young man, but he was given the command because of his masculinity, his macho attitude, his confidence in British arms. So he arrived in Jalandhar, and in Jalandhar there was a man called Edward Lake. He was an Englishman. He was the commissioner for the Jalandhar division. And so for Nicholson, Lake gave a reception, and some other Indians invited, many British were invited, in his home of this commissioner. Prominent among Lake's Indian guests was the strongly pro-British Mehtab Singh. He was a former Sikh general who had fought against the British. The British victory over the Sikhs was a very remarkable thing. But this Mehtab Singh was a close relative of the Raja of Kapurthala. But he was invited, he was pro-British, he was invited to this reception. Noticing that, like all the British present, Mehtab Singh had kept his shoes on during the reception, Nicholson decided to show off his power. After most Indian guests, including members of Mehtab Singh's entourage, had stepped out of the front door, and the Sikh dignitary's turn to leave arrived, Nicholson shouted out an order for him in Hindustani. "Take your shoes off and hold them in your hands while you leave. I want your followers to see your humiliation," shouted Nicholson. "If I'm the last Englishman left in Jalandhar, you are not to come into my room with your shoes on." Now, Mehtab Singh had come to the house of Edward Lake. It was not Nicholson's house. All the same, we are told by the biographer of Nicholson, Mehtab Singh, completely cowed, meekly did as he was told. Not only that, all swaggering about in the Jalandhar area apparently ended after this demonstration by Nicholson of British dominance over Indians and his own dominance over everyone around him. This is not a pleasant story to recall, but the title of the story is The Intoxication of Power, and the kind of cruelty and bullying that people indulge in. Now, another story from 1857. 1857 saw tremendous and most courageous spirit on the part of Indians, Hindus, Muslims, who fought jointly to liberate India. But there were also very many cruelties on both sides. Many very shameful cruelties on both sides. You might say that the British cruelties were many times more. But there were cruelties on both sides. And many who are perhaps at this lecture have read one book or another, or more than one book, by Charles Dickens, this incredible writer. Many of his books are so moving and so stirring, and we're stirred by his understanding of human nature, of humble people, poor people, their feelings and their emotions. But let us, I wanted to mention this so that we know what happens when cruelties take place. When some stories of terrible cruelties from the Indian side reached England in 1857, Charles Dickens wrote a private letter to a friend of his, a lady called Miss Coutts. And this is what he wrote, quote, "I wish I were commander-in-chief in India. I would do my utmost to exterminate the race that created those cruelties." So this was a private letter. He didn't say it publicly, but it is useful to know that when horrible things are done by any side, the reactions are absolutely extreme. Then I want to go to 1919 now. So I'm giving a kind of selected chronological sequence of some glimpses. So everyone knows of 1919 Jallianwala, April 13, Baisakhi Day, the terrible massacre that took place. It was the worst possible, worst single cruelty by the British during their period in India. And we all know about that, and the consequence of that, we all know about. But 3 days before that terrible massacre under General Dyer, there had been a demonstration in Amritsar. This was organized by two very remarkable people, Dr. Satyapal and Saifuddin Kichlu. These were two great leaders of Punjab, but they were Amritsar-based. They were leaders of Amritsar. And they had organized a great movement. And this is April 1919. But on the 10th of April, 3 days before the massacre of Jallianwala Bagh, there were demonstrations. And demonstrators were very angry because Kichlu and Satyapal had both been arrested. There was a third reason for the anger of the demonstrators, because Gandhiji, who had given the call for this movement against the Rowlatt Act, which was an act to suppress speech. This again is something that people have forgotten, that the massacre of Jallianwala Bagh was a result of people's anger. They had mobilized against, and why had they mobilized? Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs all had mobilized against the Rowlatt Act. And Gandhiji had given the call for a nationwide satyagraha, hartal, against the Rowlatt Act because it was against free speech. But when Gandhi arrived, the leaders of Punjab invited Gandhiji to come to Punjab to explain to them satyagraha, because they had not known what satyagraha is. How should we practice satyagraha? We want to do a protest. We want to do it in the right way. Please come and tell us. But the British did not allow Gandhiji to enter Punjab. He was sent back from Punjab, border of Punjab. In fact, he was sent back on a malgadi, on a goods train. So there was great reason for anger in Amritsar. Kichlu was arrested, Satyapal was arrested, Gandhiji was not allowed to come. But in their anger, this is 10th of April, 3 days before the massacre, in their anger, the crowd in Amritsar did some wild things. 5 English individuals were killed. And one English woman, a teacher, she was attacked. So now, then April 13, the terrible, shameful massacre takes place. And then there's the news goes very slowly across India, but people come to learn of it eventually. And at the end of that year, end of December of 1919, the Indian National Congress has a meeting in Amritsar. This was fixed long time earlier, even before the massacre in Amritsar. And they're meeting to discuss all that has happened. And here I'm going to read an account written at that time by somebody who was at that time quite young. His name was Kanhaiyalal Maniklal Munshi, this great writer from Gujarat, who afterwards also became many things in politics also. And he was, among other things, he was governor of Uttar Pradesh too for some time in the 50s. He was, in 1919, he was a young man. And this is what he wrote in in one of his books about what happened in December of 1919. So the Congress was meeting, and there was a resolution before it. And there was a resolution about the massacre. And it was a very strongly worded resolution. It said that, of course, the governor should be removed, the viceroy should be removed, and some justice has to be brought. But the resolution also said that we deplore the violence from the Indian side that had occurred on April 10. So this is Munshi's account. Quote, "The hearts of most of us revolted at the latter part of the resolution. This must have been Mrs. Besant's work, many thought. She was, after all, British." Now, Annie Besant, you all know about her. The previous year, 2 years earlier, she had been the president of the Indian National Congress. She was an Irish woman, but she was a white woman. So this must have been Mrs. Besant's work. One Punjab leader, continues Munshi, gave expression to the feeling rather crudely. No one born of an Indian mother, he said, could have drafted this resolution. No one born of an Indian mother could have drafted this resolution. Lokmanya too was indignant, and so were Bipin Chandra Pal and Chittaranjan Das. And the latter part of the resolution was lost by an overwhelming majority. The next day, the president wanted the committee to reconsider the resolution, as Gandhi ji, he said, was very keen on it. There were vehement protests. Ultimately, Gandhiji was helped to the table to move that the resolution be reconsidered. He spoke sitting, he was not well, so he spoke sitting. Continues Kanhayalal Munshi, referring to the remark that no son born of an Indian mother could have drafted the resolution, Gandhiji stated that he had considered deeply and long whether as an Indian he could have drafted the resolution, for indeed he had drafted it. But after long searching of the heart, he continues, he had come to the conclusion that only a person born of an Indian mother could have drafted it. And continues Munshi, and then Gandhiji spoke as if his whole life depended upon the question. When he stopped, we were at his feet. The resolution was reconsidered and accepted in its original form, unquote. And Munshi says that thereafter, the moral high ground belonged to the people of India. It was a very major element in the independence movement. Now, I had earlier quoted to you the absolutely unbelievable remark of Charles Dickens after 1857. But it's worth noting that in 1931, so 12 years after Jallianwala, when Gandhiji goes to England for negotiations, and he goes to Lancashire, Manchester area, where many thousands of British workers had lost their jobs because of India's boycott. But the people of Lancashire, the wives and mothers of those who had lost their jobs, greeted Gandhi quite warmly. And then, of course, Gandhi meets the king. This is a well-known incident. And the journalists ask him, what are you going to wear when there's a tea party? Everybody's invited, Gandhiji's invited. What clothes are you going to wear to go to Buckingham Palace? Gandhiji said, I'll wear the clothes I'm wearing. Indian peasants' clothes. Yes, it's cold, I might wear a shawl over my chest. And then after the reception, Gandhiji was asked, did you feel uncomfortable with your clothes? Everybody was wearing this formal clothes. So he said, the king had enough clothes for both of us, said Gandhiji. A couple of more things about Gandhiji, moving chronologically. 1947, of course, we all know all that is happening. Independence is coming, partition is coming. Sadly, there's also violence. And Gandhi has fought, as many Indians have fought for India's liberation from the British. On June 14, 1947, this many people have forgotten. In the south of India, part of today's Kerala, was a princely state called Travancore in those days, and there was a Maharaja of Travancore. And in June of 47, the Maharaja of Travancore and his Diwan, Sir C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, a brilliant lawyer, brilliant personality. But the two of them together, Maharaja and the Diwan, these people have forgotten, they declared that Travancore had become independent and had left India. And they even named an agent to the Pakistan that was also to come. Yes, for some time, Travancore, courtesy of the Maharaja and courtesy of the Diwan, had decided to become independent of India. So Gandhiji was in Delhi at the time. It was very sad that partition was happening, but there he was with his friends and allies, co-workers, and he spoke. After prayer meeting, he gave his remarks. And he spoke about how sad he was that Travancore was doing this, and he wanted Travancore to change its opinion. And of course, they did. After some time, Diwan had to leave. The Maharaja changed his mind. Travancore joined India, of course. But at that time, this is interesting what Gandhi told at his prayer meeting. He said, in India's long history, India was only united politically under Ashoka and Chandragupta, and that too not wholly. And only under British rule, says Gandhi, only under British rule was India united from Dibrugarh to Karachi, from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. So this opponent of British rule, absolutely fierce opponent of British rule, concedes that politically and administratively, the British did give this kind of unity to a much larger part of the subcontinent than had ever happened before. Of course, we also know that although they had created the unity, then they created disunity again, and while leaving in some kind of pique and bad temper in 47, they created deep division again. We all know that story. Now, we all associate Gandhiji rightly with non-violence, absolutely rightly. But our focus on Gandhiji's non-violence makes it easy for us to forget his passion for freedom. Now, Mountbatten people have heard of. Before Mountbatten, there was a viceroy called Wavell. Wavell, he was a bit of a historian, a bit of a poet. He was a great commander. He had fought in North Africa against Rommel. He was one of Britain's great generals. And during the Quit India movement, he was the commander-in-chief of the British forces in India. Then he became viceroy from 43 to 47. So Wavell in his diary writes, of all those who had opposed British rule in different parts of the world, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, Asia, and Wavell writes that of all those who fought British rule, no one had a greater passion for independence, a greater opposition to the empire than Gandhi. So when we recall his non-violence, we forget that he was an absolutely passionate fighter for India's freedom. But it's also important to recognize that Gandhi was not only keen on India's freedom, he was keen on the freedom of the individual Indian. So when the Quit India Resolution was adopted in 42, overwhelmingly adopted in Mumbai, there were 13 Indian individuals who voted against it. Thousands and thousands voted in favor, but 13 individuals voted against it. And speaking after the voting, Gandhi started with the dissenters. He said, I congratulate the 13 friends who have voted against the resolution. Now, so we move forward again, 45, 46. Quit India happens. People are in jail for years, 2 years, 3 years, thousands of people in jail. Then they're released, and then independence is slowly coming. And meanwhile, Netaji Subhash Bose has his International Army, and his slogan, Jai Hind, has become also very popular in India. So this is a story of February 1946, a year and a half before independence. There was a mutiny in the Royal Indian Navy and some ships of the Navy. People know of this. Although it's also worth noting that only the ratings, the humbler workers in the Navy, they revolted. The Indian officers of the Navy, not one of them joined the revolt. And many workers, textile workers in Mumbai, supported the revolt. And some of these workers who were supporting the revolt, they were in Mumbai, they were asking the citizens of Mumbai, shout Jai Hind. You must shout Jai Hind. So Gandhiji heard of this. And this is what he wrote at that time. Quote, inasmuch as a single person is compelled to shout Jai Hind or any popular slogan, a nail is driven into the coffin of Swaraj in terms of the dumb millions of India. And then 2 months before freedom, again, June 47, this is what Gandhiji said at the end of his prayer meeting in Delhi. Quote, now we all know of Gandhiji's love for the name Ram, Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram, and Ram was his, you might say, part of his breathing process. So he says this 2 months before independence. If someone comes to me and says, will you or will you not utter Ram Nam? If you don't, look at this talwar. Then I shall say, I will not utter Ram Nam at the point of the sword. If someone comes to me and wants to make me recite the kalma at the point of the sword, I will never do so. I will defend myself with my life. So individual Indian has to be free, not just the whole of India has to be free. There's more I can say, but I think we are proceeding with time. So I will now, from my Punjab book. Yes. We all know of this absolutely horrible killings that sadly took place during partition and independence, especially horrible in Punjab. And what the world does not know or has forgotten is that although the terrible killings took place in Punjab on both sides, Hindus and Sikhs were killed, Muslims were killed. But so many people protected their neighbors. Millions and millions of people crossed the border from West Punjab to the eastern side, from East Punjab to West Punjab. That's a story that we are all familiar with. But how did all these people manage to escape? Because in so many cases, neighbors protected their neighbors. So the Punjabis who protected their fellow Punjabis from the other religion, they outnumbered the Punjabis who attacked and killed fellow Punjabis. This is the forgotten story of partition. So my wife and I, we were in different parts of Punjab, including in Pakistani side, Lahore, and we interviewed people for their memories of the partition killings. And one man we met, I'm going to read just a few lines of what he told us. His name is Chaudhary Mohammad Hayat. He actually was a retired squadron leader in Pakistan's Air Force. And he recalled his memories of 47. So he's from a village near the town of Gujarat. Now, Pakistani Punjab is a town called Gujarat. It's nothing to do with India's Gujarat state. So this man came from a village near there. So he told us a story that when he was a boy, how he was helped by a Sikh man called Bhagat Singh. He called him Bhagat Saab. And Hayat came from a humble Nichara Jat background. There are Muslim Jats also in Punjab, as Hindu Jats and Sikh Jats. So this was a Muslim Jat from a very humble background. And he recalled this man, Bhagat Singh. And this is what he said. I first met him in 1939 when I was in the 4th class. He was about 60, 65. He had a short beard, he had a white turban, a pink and white complexion. He enjoyed smoking the hookah. We boys kept the angeethi burning for his hookah. He knew all the principals and headmasters of Gujarat Tehsil And he used to get tuition fees excused for poor boys, especially for poor Jat boys like me. But for Bhagat Sahab, I would still be cutting grass in my village, he told us. On 10 August 1947, people said to Bhagat, "Bhag jao, yahan khatra hai tumhare liye, tum bhag jao." "I will not leave," he said. He was living alone. His wife was dead. 2 sons and a daughter were living elsewhere. He moved to live with our family. This is what Hayat told us. He lived with our family in a shed near our well. One day he heard that his daughter and son-in-law had been killed. Then news came of a train arriving from the east, from India, with dead bodies. Puri gaddi katal ho gayi, he was told. So he was very shaken. And so Hayat said that as a boy, he took Bhagat Sahab on the back of his bicycle to a Hakim in Sialkot town. And the 40-kilometer ride took 2 nights and a day, but there was no improvement. And then there was another incident. There was a train from the other side carrying dead bodies from Pakistan, of Hindus and Sikhs to India. This also stopped at the station there. And when he saw all this, Bhagat Sahab, he says, disappeared. And this Hayat tried to locate him, but he could not find him. And he said that, "Inse acha insan maine nahi dekha." Then he said that in 47, a Zehreeli Hawa had hit Punjab. So, but this was one of many stories we collected, which also I wanted to mention. So before I conclude, I want to say that when we look at the past, we find pain, we find shame, we find the intoxication of power, but we also find an amazing amount of goodness, compassion, and mutual help, which is also what Lokmanilal wants these institutions and new educational institutions to convey to the future. So with that, I thank all of you.
Thank you, most respected Rajmohan ji. We have heard you, sir, with great interest. So profound, so thought-provoking. Many in the audience must be eager to interact with you, sir. Keeping in mind the constraints of the time at our disposal, maybe you would like to respond to a few questions. I am first requesting our distinguished panelists to ask their questions. Members of the audience may post their questions in the question and answer box. Depending on the time available, these questions will be taken up. So,
can I ask a question?
yes, sir, please.
So this is Praveer from Bangalore. You mentioned about the dissent expressed by a Bombay person and not chanting Jai Hind. And Gandhiji insisting that we shouldn't impose such a slogan chanting on anybody. What does that incident and that expression by Gandhi tells us about the present? How should we interpret it? What is the lesson learned there?
Dear Praveer, the lessons are so obvious. You don't need an old man who is now in Illinois to spell out the lessons. But I think it is important to remember that the fight that our forefathers, our parents, grandparents, all those who fought for India's independence, that fight included the fight for every individual's independence. And so we must remember that. When we look at the current scene, we should remember that. I don't need to spell this out. It is so painfully obvious, so painfully obvious.
Thank you.
Sir, actually, talking to you is such a big honor that words fail me. But there is that incident of Salman Rushdie, which has touched me so much. In one of your things, you've mentioned about Salman Rushdie coming to Jalandhar. And I would like you to repeat that incident. It's beautiful. And how do we learn from history, especially your words, that religion alone cannot control countries about Bangladesh? I mean, that is really so very true today. Something about that, sir. We need it.
By the way, I think you're referring to a man called Salman Ahmad.
Salman Rashid.
Salman Rashid, yes. Salman Rashid, not Salman Rushdie, the well-known novelist. But the Salman Rashid is an incredible person now living in Lahore who came from Jalandhar. His family came from Jalandhar, and so unfortunately, many members of his family in Jalandhar lost their lives during the sad killings of 1947. But Salman just felt that he had to establish to find out, because he was told that his grandfather was a well-known doctor and loved doctor. Why should a good person be killed? And so he made several journeys, and he managed to eventually then meet even people who were involved in the son of the person who had killed. So he built this bridge. And we met his mother also in Lahore many years ago. And despite all the, we asked her for the names of the people who might have been killed, who were killed in this. So she mentioned the relatives of those who were killed. Then she mentioned the names of the servants who had been killed. This was very moving for me and for my wife Usha. When we heard all this, what is true of the 47 killings is a great number of people were killed tragically on all sides. But the well-off, in most cases, because they had contacts, the railways, the airlines, with the police, with the army, they managed to escape. The vast majority of those who were killed were the very humble, poor people. Their names are also not known. As I've said often, in Washington, there is a great memorial, the Vietnam Wall. Every single person American killed, his name or her name is there. Not of the Vietnamese, but certainly the Americans killed are there. But in India, we don't have the names of those who were killed in these 47 killings or other killings. So to hear the names of the servants who were killed was, I was touched by that, because they symbolized the unknown person, unmarked human being who was killed and is still today killed in many parts of the world, including in India, and nobody even knows about these cruelties. But anyway, I'm slightly departing the story. But yes, Salman Rashid did manage to link up with those related to the killers, and his mother told us, by the way, despite all these terrible losses, jab koi Jalandhar ka naam leta hai to dil mein kuch ho jata hai. She still has a connection to Jalandhar, and this is true also of the Hindus and Sikhs who had to leave West Punjab, who are on our side, and who have similar feelings about Rawalpindi, Multan, Sargodha, Lahore, so many places there. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question.
So,
Hello.
Yes, sir. Please ask your question.
Can I ask one question? I'm Rajesh Purohit, former director, Indian Museum. My question is that Gandhiji fought a colossal battle and brought freedom to us, but how he failed to stop the partition? How he failed? He could have achieved it. It was a very, it was not such big a battle.
Well, this is a very important question. But it assumes that Gandhiji was a superman, that he was something like an almighty, which he was not. He was a human being. He achieved many things astonishingly because of the close cooperation he received from everybody. You know, people mentioned that I've got Gandhiji's blood, but you know, every Indian has Gandhiji's Atma, spirit. And there were other incredible heroes in our national life. Gandhiji could not achieve all that he wanted to achieve. In 1947, not only did the Muslims of what became Pakistan, they wanted Pakistan. Many Muslims who were in India also at that time wanted Pakistan. But most Hindus and Sikhs also wanted Pakistan, partition. And the man who was very keen, above all very keen at this time, from December 46 for partition, was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Jawaharlal Nehru wanted it. On both sides, both in the eastern part of the subcontinent and the western part, the majority opinion had swung in favor of division. And Gandhi tried very hard. You know, as all of you know, he did try. He said, all right, let us see if we can offer the prime ministership of a united India to Jinnah and keep India united. Everybody opposed him. Nehru opposed him. Patel opposed him. Rajagopalachari opposed him. Rajan Babu opposed him. Govind Vallabh Pant opposed him. Bilkul nahi. So Gandhi was not a superman. And another thing worth noting, this is what Gandhi was asked about violence. Why, you know, people ask why he could not avoid partition. Other people wanted to know why he could not avoid violence. आपने 30 साल से हिंदुस्तान को, भारत को अहिंसा के बारे में सिखाया है, ये लोग तो कत्ल कर रहे हैं एक दूसरे को. So Gandhi's response to that was that I gave two ideas: fear not and hate not. Fear not and hate not. You know, Jawaharlal Nehru has written in one of his assessment of Gandhi that one of the amazing things that Gandhi did was he identified fear as the problem, and he identified it, and the fear then left the Indian psyche for a long time. So Gandhi said, fear not मैंने कहा और hate not मैंने कहा, लेकिन fear not लोगों को पसंद आया, hate not लोगों को पसंद नहीं आया. और अंग्रेजों के साथ hate, और फिर आपस में that hate was transferred to hatred of Hindus or hatred of Muslims. You're absolutely right. Gandhi could not avoid partition. He could not avoid the killings. You may say, therefore, he failed. Yes, he was a human being. He failed.
Sir, I have a question.
So I don't have a question, but I have an observation. As a student of history and English literature, first of all, how wonderful it is that you showed us, you know, so many things which Dickens also had to, you know, say about, you know, the violence in our country or the way people were being treated. But there are some sparkling lines I'm taking with me to take to my classroom. Lines like where you said, Gandhiji saying that the British Emperor was wearing clothes for two. And that wonderful line where you spoke about how Gandhiji said, yes, an Indian born of an Indian mother only could write such a thing. I think in our classrooms today, we need to make people realize what Gandhiji interpreted freedom as, because it's important, sir, as you pointed out, and who better to hear from than you. You know, even my daughter had sparkle in her eyes when I said who I was going to listen to. And yes, sir, that wonderful line you said, even if we force one person to say Jai Hind, it's a nail in the coffin of democracy. I think we need to carry these messages to our classrooms. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Sir, I have a suggestion. I have a, a question also, and something to share also. When you were talking about the partition of India and the troubles that we had undergone during the partition of India, I was reminded of a film that I had watched some months ago, that is Pinjar. So in Pinjar, they had shown the things when you were saying that some people had helped the other people survive and some people had betrayed the people. So in Pinjar, they had shown it very beautifully. And so my question is, of course, something related to the Indus Valley and the Vedic history, that in the development of Indian civilization, the Indus Valley history has played a more prominent role, or the Aryan civilization, the Aryan history has played a more prominent role, sir, in the development of Indian civilization. So this is my question, sir.
Well, I appreciate your question and comment, and I will only say that I'm not a good scholar of the Indus Valley or the Ganga Valley civilizations, and so I don't have the advantage of researched knowledge there. So I will just defer to your knowledge, and I thank you for your remark.
Thank you, sir.
Namaskar, sir. I have a question.
Yes, please proceed.
I'm Kusum Srivastava from MPVM Ganga Gurukulam, and I'm a history teacher. I have a question. Gandhiji, when he was, he did a very good work for the upliftment of the poorer section and the backward classes. And when he started living in the untouchables colony, that time we call them as the Shudras. So he gave them a name as Harijans. And there only, because he started living in that Harijans colony, he did all the work by himself. And because of his good work only, he got the title of Mahatma. And from that time, he came to be known as Mahatma Gandhi. And he did a very good work for the providing education to the untouchables of that time. And B.R. Ambedkar was one of the person who, after getting good education, he became so popular. He became the father of the constitution. But I have a question. What were the differences between why Mahatma Gandhi and Ambedkar were not agree over the points? What were the differences in their ideas?
That's a great question, and there were sharp differences. But remember this, that Gandhi, Nehru, Patel invited Dr. Ambedkar to be the first Minister of Justice and Law in the Indian government, chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution. And Dr. Ambedkar then played this amazing role in architecting the Constitution. So that period, of course, Gandhiji soon was killed, but Dr. Ambedkar was there. And so this amazing partnership that was created is also part of history. Yes, the differences, the conflict is part of history, but this partnership is also part of history. And if you look back at history, isn't it absolutely amazing that Dr. Ambedkar, coming from the Dalit community, becomes the chief person in the preparation of the Constitution. And the Constituent Assembly, the vast majority of them are so-called high caste Hindus. And they absolutely thunderously support this Constitution, which gives complete equality. It is an absolutely wonderful thing. History has many tragic things, but this is a beautiful thing that history achieved. That a Dalit leader becomes the chief lawmaker for independent India. So, by the way, there's this book that was mentioned in the introduction about, called Founding Fathers, which gives you the explanation of the Gandhi-Ambedkar differences, why they arose, and what was the nature of those differences. So I will refer you to that book for an answer to your question about those differences. But I take this chance to underline the magic of history, whereby this leader from the so-called despised castes becomes the chief lawmaker for India?
क्या मैं कोशिश कर सकता हूँ इस सवाल के बारे में थोड़ा और समझने के लिए?
जी सर।
मैं हिंदी में थोड़ा, राजमोहन जी क्षमा करेंगे, मैं हिंदी में इसलिए बोल रहा हूँ कि मैं पहले दिन से ही पतंजलि विद्यालय से जुड़ा हुआ हूँ और मुझे महादेवी जी आज याद आ रही हैं। उन्होंने कुछ कहा था, शायद कृष्णा जी को उस संबंध में कुछ अधिक स्मरण होगा। ज़्यादातर लोग शायद अगर इसमें कोई ऐसा है जो हिंदी न समझता हो तो मुझे बता दे, मैं अंग्रेजी में भी बोल लेता हूँ। मुझे लगता ये है कि जिस तरफ इशारा किया जा रहा था गांधी और अंबेडकर जी के मतभेद के बारे में, उसके लिए शायद एक और दृष्टि से उसे देखा जा सकता है। मुझे लगता ये है कि गांधी दुश्मन नहीं बनाते थे, जिसकी तरफ आपने इशारा किया था, और कोशिश करते थे कि जो शुचिता है वो जीवन में अपनाएं। जब हरिजन की बात आती है तो वहां पर केवल वो अपने को ही शुद्ध नहीं करना चाहते हैं, उनके आश्रम में जितने लोग जाते हैं उनसे वही काम कराते हैं वो जो कि हरिजन लोग किया करते हैं, क्योंकि कारण उसका यही है कि आप जब वो काम करेंगे तो आप में शुचिता वाला जो आग्रह है वो बनेगा। अंबेडकर वाला जो माइंडसेट था या उनकी सोचने का जो तरीका था वो कुछ अलग था, और वो तरीका था राइट्स वाला, जहां पर आप सेल्फ प्यूरिफिकेशन और अदर प्यूरिफिकेशन की तरफ जा रहे हैं और जहां पर आप राइट्स की तरफ जा रहे हैं, वो दो अलग अलग जो हैं अप्रोचेस हैं। गांधी जी वाली अप्रोच जो थी वो राइट्स वाली अप्रोच नहीं थी। गांधी जी वाली अप्रोच ये थी कि आप अपने को पवित्र करिए और दूसरे को भी उस पवित्रता का साथी बनाइए। यही कारण था जिसकी वजह से जो था गांधी और अंबेडकर जी में ये भेद आया था। उसको शायद समझने की आवश्यकता है। उसको शायद मेरे ख्याल से कोशिश ये करें हम कि ये न करें कि हाँ कास्ट के आधार पर जो था गांधी की अप्रोच जो थी इसके लिए जो था, क्योंकि वो वर्ण व्यवस्था के समर्थक थे इसलिए उन्होंने ऐसा किया, और अंबेडकर ने भी उनका विरोध इसलिए किया क्योंकि उन्होंने गांधी को वर्ण व्यवस्था के समर्थक के रूप में देखा। मैं इसे इस तरीके से देखता हूँ।
धन्यवाद धन्यवाद धन्यवाद।
आपको अपने को अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा, आप सुनाई नहीं पड़ रही हैं।
There was a question which was asked by our principal earlier. I'm just repeating that question. How do we differentiate between this fake news and the internet news and the history that we have read through the years and which we have revered through the years? Suddenly we are hearing everything against that. How do we discern what is the truth in that? How do we make out what is the falsehood in that? Especially Khilafat movement. I mean, see, we see two different versions of it coming out right now.
Well, that's a tremendous question, and it's, you know, a great deal depends on us, each of us, of course, whether or not we have the courage to examine something absolutely with utter faithfulness to facts, without any fear or any hesitation. But I will try to answer it in this way. As you also know, what we are facing in India is what America has also faced, and other countries all over the world are also facing. This fake news is a word that is very popular with Trump. Anything that he did not like was called fake news. But what happened here was that many ordinary journalists, many judges, magistrates, who were in charge of elections in different places. Some of them were affiliated even to the Republican Party, but the average journalist, the average government servant, the average policeman, the average magistrate, the average judge of a high court, all these people played their part in asserting the facts, in repudiating fake news. So, yes, you're right when you say that now it is up to each individual when there is so much pressure, when there is this fierce pressure, organized pressure, campaign that you must believe only in this, and not believe in that. Then it becomes very important. It's left to the individual. But we can all encourage fellow individuals. And every time a writer or a judge or a policeman does something that is independent and courageous, we must honor that. We must highlight that. We must respect that. So, I mean, this recent example, I decided, by the way, before speaking today, that आज के हालात के बारे में मैं नहीं जाऊंगा भारत के हालात में, लेकिन क्योंकि जो आपने ये खास सवाल पूछा है, ये जो बेचारी ग्रेटा थुनबर्ग, उसने कुछ कह दिया कि फार्मर्स की हालत के बारे में कुछ हमें जानना चाहिए, तो what a tremendous attack on her from all sides. If anybody says that this question should be examined, then that person becomes the target of such a coordinated, phenomenal backlash. तो ऐसा तो हमारे देश में हो रहा है, लेकिन इसे कैसे रोकें हम? तो ये अगर आप भाई साहब ने कहा था कि गांधी जी ने तो पार्टीशन नहीं बचाया, तो अब कोई गांधी तो है नहीं, और don't expect a few people to somehow by magic do this. अगर हमें भारत के लोकतंत्र को बचाना है, आज़ादी को रखना है, कंपैशन रखना है, एक दूसरे के साथ अच्छे बर्ताव करना है, एक दूसरे का आदर करना है, तो हम सबको ये जिम्मेदारी उठानी होगी. कोई महात्मा, संत या कोई जादूगर आकर के ये हमारे लिए काम नहीं, या कोई पार्टी का नेता, कोई ऑपोजिशन पार्टी का नेता अचानक आके कुछ कर देगा, ऐसी आशा रखना या ऐसी मांग रखना ये उचित नहीं है. ये हम सबकी जिम्मेदारी है. हम सबकी जिम्मेदारी कि कोई भी अगर बात हमारे सामने आती है तो हम छानबीन करके उसकी परीक्षा करेंगे, उस पर रिसर्च करेंगे, और जो सच है उसको बताने के लिए हम डरेंगे नहीं. और वो गांधी जी के 2 मंत्र, hate not and fear not. Today all of us have to recognize that hate not and fear not are absolutely essential for us in all our dealings. And whether it is hatred of one caste or of one religion or anything, we will absolutely not hate and we will absolutely not fear. And this nation belongs to everybody, absolutely everybody. And everybody is equal. Everybody is equal in this nation. And this nation belongs to everybody. And this is, anyway, but I have already violated my own promise to myself कि आज के हालात के बारे में मैं नहीं बोलूँगा, लेकिन आपने मुझे करा दिया.
Professor Vinay Pandey ji, sir, would you like to ask any question? Sir, please unmute yourself.
Yes, I would like simply to add that the entire world today is in the throes of a transition. We are, in a way, enveloped by competing ideologies and truths. This is the post-truth generation in a way. And in these troubled times, we need very straightforward and simple principles to try to make sense of the world. What I gather from Professor Rajmohan Gandhi is that we have to strive to these objectives, to these ends. And Mahatma Gandhi's is an example we have to follow. The two crucial things that he said, fear not and hate not, should continue to be guideposts for us. And I hope that this will materialize sooner than later, because we are on the tip of a explosive situation. And Professor Rajmohan Gandhi's work, I've read some of them, not all, will provide us with inklings to how do we proceed to do these things. It was a really remarkable experience we had listening to you, sir. Thank you very much indeed.
May I request Professor Manus Mukul Das? Sir, would you like to say something?
It was wonderful listening to you, Rajmohanji, after 40 years. You began with the Mahabharata. How it is an epic which shows the end of revenge, the great catastrophic war, and how people dream of reconciliation. I was reminded of the other epic. In this epic, the Mahabharata, you have cousins wanting to possess the throne and fighting each other. In the other epic, the relationship between Ram and Bharat. What a beautiful relationship. That also I was reminded of, that the Ramayana is perhaps not based on revenge between those two brothers. So connecting people to each other. The great thing about Indian nationalism, as distinguished from the rise of nationalism in Europe. 19th century European nationalism, the nations believed they were the most superior nation, perhaps with the one exception of Immanuel Kant. All other thinkers, they were glorifying their own country, and it led to two devastating wars. The Indian national movement, there people talked about the indivisibility of humanity. They talked about a culture in which the entire world could become one, the Akhand, the Vishwanir. The word Vishwanir was used by Tagore in connection with his dream of Shantiniketan. And in his poem, Bharat Tirtho, he writes how so many different streams of humanity have converged and become one. Ethai Arjo, Etha Onarjo, Ethai Drabir Chin, Shok Hundol, Mughal Pathan, Ek Dehe Hololin. The second paragraph of the national anthem talks about how different religions proclaim the glory of Godhead in this land. Ahotobo ahvano pracharito shunitobo udarobani Hindu Bauddha Shikho Jaina Parashiko Musalman o Krishtani Purabo Paschimo Ashe Tabo Singhasano Pashe Premo Har Hoyogata. It was a beautiful reference that you made about Gandhi saying that only the son of an Indian mother could have written that. That vision of India is the vision of all humanity. It is not just India. And India perhaps will not be India if it proclaims itself to be superior to other nations. It is India because it talks about the akhandata. It talks about the indivisibility of existence. And it was lovely hearing you. It was wonderful listening to such a sane talk. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rajmohan ji.
May I say this? Am I? Yes.
Please.
Meeting you, Manas Mukul Das ji, after all these years and listening to you is it's absolutely inspiring. I'd not counted on it. This is absolutely fantastic. So Krishna ji, you and all your colleagues who are running these amazing institutions, and now you've put together this particular occasion this evening, given us all chance to encourage each other, support each other, learn from each other. So I just feel that Lokmanilal ji has started something very, very precious, and I would say of revolutionary importance. And all the teachers gathered here, and the children that they are in contact with, all the professors gathered here, all the thinkers gathered here, all the lovers of India gathered here, all the lovers of learning gathered here. So, and the way we started and the prayer, there is something very meaningful in this, very hope-giving in this. So we are before a very demanding situation. But I have to say that this relatively old man who's speaking to you has received an injection of some very good vitamins as a result of this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your gratitude and listening to you. I see some questions in the question and answer box also. Already one question has been asked. Here is another. This is by Ms. Gopa Bhattacharya. How do you view the development of Indian education system today in a politics driven by social fabric? How can we take politics away from a career to a social commitment? Would you like to answer, sir?
Well, I think the question itself contains the answer, really. Social commitment is the key, and politics is often an impediment. And so it's up to each individual, up to each teacher, up to each head of an institution. It's also the teamwork amongst all of us. This relationship between Indian and fellow Indian, citizen and fellow citizen. So I think it's clear that we are, along with the rest of the world, we are facing huge, huge challenges. But,
Sir, excuse me, I have a question. We know what has happened to India with the Britishers coming and ruling us over 2 centuries. But sometimes I feel that what if the Britishers hadn't come to India? What kind of a history would we have then in India if the Britishers hadn't come?
If the Britishers had not come, then, among other things, we would not be the cricket champions of the world. Perhaps I would not be in Illinois at the moment where I am. So many Indians would not be in the UK at the time as we are. But I think that is, although a very interesting question, it is, how shall I put it? It is an amusing question, but it is, they did come. For good or for ill, they came. You know, we can't quarrel with the past and wish, supposing there had been no British, supposing there had been no Mughals, supposing there had been no Prithviraj, supposing there had been no Mahabharata, supposing there had been no Ramayana, no Tulsidas, no Gurudev Tagore, no Jinnah, supposing there had been. So those are all amusing questions. But I think in the spirit of Lokmanilal ji, who wants to meet a need, he saw the destruction of the potatoes and the importation of potatoes, and he did what he did with his cold storage. And then he creates this network of schools because he sees the need. You identify the need and you meet the need to the best of your ability. So each of us, we can see what the need is around us, in our circle, in our family, in our contacts, and we meet the need. So anyway, thank you.
Namaskar, sir. I have a question, although personal, I must say. Gandhiji was a person who was revered by everyone, a great respect for him. Everybody had. You, as his grandson, how do you perceive Gandhiji, and what was Gandhiji to you as a grandson?
Gandhiji was a very loving grandfather, but he restrained himself in expressing his love to his children and grandchildren. But even though he restrained himself, we could feel his love. So above all, people like me, his grandchildren, we loved him. And he was, yes, he was not a quote unquote normal grandfather, but he was a very loving grandfather. He was also, of course, in my brief relationship with him, I also saw that he was a very interesting and impressive, because he was, with my own eyes, I could see that people were sometimes angry with him, unhappy with him, and objecting to him, sometimes threatening him. I was a boy, but I could understand what was happening. But in his response to these people, he was not afraid. And he was also always courteous. So, but that is how what I learned from him. But in terms of the relationship, it was a relationship of mutual love.
And that was the last question the time at our disposal permitted us to take up. I thank you. I thank you, Rajmohan ji, for your talk and a wonderful interactive session. Your blessings from this interactive session, we all are able to see the things with greater clarity. And I thank you personally and on behalf of all your listeners. Now I request Shri Om Prakash Bagadia ji, President of the governing body of Maharshi Patanjali Vidya Mandir, the first of the many schools founded by Shri Lokmanilal ji, to speak a few words. Sir.
Well, I must say, I have known Lokmanilal ji for so many years, and I respected him. I was in close contact with him ever since my wedding to his daughter, Pushpa. But I looked forward to meeting him every time I came to Allahabad. And I also was a bit wary because he would ask me, अच्छा आपने कितना value का export किया है इस साल? And I often really didn't know the value of our export. So I was a bit hesitant, but at the same time, there was so much to learn from Lokmanilal that I valued the time with him. One thing I must mention is his integrity. He told me once that I have taken a lot of loan for the school building. And if someone phones me in the morning reminding me of the loan and wanting it back, I make sure that the loan is returned to him by the evening with the interest. So there is something his integrity was, apart from his ingenuity and innovativeness, his integrity was very precious. And I think today's MPVM is replete with that integrity. Yeah. Krishna will not compromise on that front. So I think that way there is something in nature that honors a person's vision with the blessing of someone like Krishna. Otherwise, why would Krishna come into Lokmanilalji's life and to look after these schools so ably? So I must say there's a continuity. And as far as Rajmohan Gandhi is concerned, I have also known him for 40 years. And the first time I met him was in Tinsukia in Assam. And he was leading a group of morally armament people, very young people. He was by far the senior most. And what I learned from them was when I point my finger at my neighbor, there are 3 more pointing back at me. When I point my finger at my neighbor, there are 3 more pointing back at me. So the point is, if you want change, I was hankering after change in our union leader. But what I learned from them is, that you first look at what is not right in you. And then maybe that other person may change or may not change. So what I'm saying is both in the lives of Lokmanilalji and Rajmohanji, there is this element of being different, integrity on the one hand and also looking inwards. So we are very fortunate to have had Lokmanilalji as our founder and inspirer, and we are very fortunate today to have Rajmohanji speak to us and point us in the direction of what we should aim for our students. So thank you, and I think that's all I can be expected to say today, but I'm also very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your reflections with us. And may I now request Mrs. Alpana Dey, Principal MPVM Ganga Gurukulam, for the expression of gratitude.
Namaskar. A simple thank you has magic. It warms the heart and creates a moment of connection and peace between two people. It is indeed a great honor for me to express my deepest gratitude on behalf of Maharishi Patanjali Group of Schools to Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, a great scholar and author. Sir, you are a great source of inspiration for all of us. It was really a pleasure listening to you, sir. Knowing more about Gandhiji from you today has definitely enriched us. Listening to interesting facts from the past was a lifetime opportunity for all of us. Understanding the great words, fear not, hate not, became quite simple. Surely our teachers will share these experiences with their students. I pray to God that our bonding grows stronger and we are blessed with many more presentations with you. My sincere gratitude to Shri Om Prakash Bagaria ji for your guidance and love. Your words of wisdom always rejuvenate us. I express my deepest gratitude to the panelists, including a galaxy of eminent educationists, including senior professors and faculty members from the University of Allahabad, senior members of the governing body of Maharshi Patanjali Vidya Mandir Samiti, parents, principals, and teachers from Prayagraj and other parts of the country. My sincere gratitude to our mentor, Dr. Krishna Gupta, for giving us an opportunity to listen to Rajmohan ji. I thank the principals and teachers of Patanjali Group of Schools. I also express my deepest gratitude to the members of media. Thank you once again to all of you, sir.
And with this, we come to the end of the most memorable session. I thank all the participants who by their presence contributed to making the event memorable. We are closing the session with the Shanti Mantra. Thank you.